oversight hearing on the Guam Police Department, facilitated by the Committee on the Guam U.S. Military Relocation, Public Safety, and Judiciary, is hereby convened. I would like to start off by highlighting that in accordance with the public notification requirements by law, that the initial notification on this oversight hearing was disseminated to the stakeholders, inclusive of the Chief of Police, on the 4th of November, and then the subsequent second notice was sent out on the 9th of November in accordance with the open government law. I'd like to, before I continue, recognize my colleagues who are here with us this afternoon. Senator Tony Adam to my immediate left, and then Senator Nerissa Underwood. Thank you very much, Senators, for joining us this afternoon. For the information of the members in the audience and all those who are tuning in this afternoon, this oversight hearing will reflect specifically on the CVPR program, the Community Volunteer Police Reserve Program within the Guam Police Department, specifically on issues that will be posed to the Chief of Police and representatives that he would like to bring up to the podium to respond to, on issues such as the status of the civilian volunteer police reservists, the organizational chart for the CVPR, the standard operating procedures of the CVPR program, current active numbers within the CVPR program, the status of the internal audit of the CVPR program as it relates to the 18th cycle and the 23 police reservists who were directly affected by that, the status of the CVPR cycles, and any other outstanding concerns that deal directly with the CVPR program. If there are any questions by my colleagues with regards to issues outside of the realm of this particular program, which is specific in nature, I'm going to ask my colleagues to, I will give the flexibility to pose the question and provide the chief an opportunity to be able to respond. And if he would like some time to provide direct responses to those particular questions subsequent to the discussion on the CVPR, then I will allow the chief to provide responses in writing after this particular oversight hearing. So those are the rules of engagement as it applies to this oversight hearing. So at this time, if I can invite the following individuals who are within the Guam Police Department or who are CVPR members, those who have signed in, Ms. Elizabeth Flickinger, obviously Chief Cruz, please, if you can join us up front. We have Shane Certeza, Rachel Beneventi, Pauline, Sarah Antalan Doyes, and Nadine Pruitt. And as we invite these individuals up to the front, I'd like to welcome Senator Bram McCready. Welcome, Senator, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon in this discussion. Chief, you did receive we'll give you a couple minutes. Once again, if these individuals would like to join us up front, then you're welcome to join us. Shane Certeza, Rachel Beneventi, there's a Pauline, there's a Doyes, and there's a Nadine. I know Mr. Ron McNinch, unless you're directly affiliated with the program, then I'm going to hold off. Okay. But thank you very much, Mr. McNinch. We do also have Vice Speaker Cruz and Senator who has joined us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, for joining us. Once again, just so that everyone understands that the line of questionings will be focused primarily on the CVPR program as presented in a letter to the Chief of Police, and I'll give him the flexibility to be able to present direct responses to those particular questions as it applies to the CVPR program. If there are any sideline questions dealing with the Guam Police Department, I have asked that my colleagues, I will give them the opportunity to present the question, but provide the discretion of the chief to be able to respond at this time. If not, then the committee is going to request that responses be provided within the next week and a half in writing to members of this committee and to the chair. So as we proceed further, also our colleagues, there's a good number of documents that were presented by the Chief of Police, the GPD 18th cycle course matrix, the CVPR cycle suitability matrix, as well as the volunteer services command. And because of the length and the number of pages of these particular documents that have just been provided by the chief just prior to the oversight hearing. These particular documents will be forwarded to you electronically immediately after this oversight hearing. So, Chief, if I can just ask you to identify yourself, identify those who have joined you at the table, and then you may proceed. Thank you, Chief, for joining us.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. I am Joseph I. Cruz. I am the Chief of Police for the Guam Police Department. To my immediate right is Lieutenant Arthur Paulino. He is the commander of the Volunteer Services Command. To my immediate left is Colonel Maurice Sayama. He is my police commander. And to his left is Sergeant 1 Elizabeth Flickinger, and she is assigned to our Volunteer Services Command as well. I would like the committee to be aware that behind me are staff officers as well from the Guam Police Department. So should any question arise within their purview, under their purview or within their scope, I will be asking them to step forward to provide testimony to those questions. Again, I'd like to make it clear for the record that the documents that have been given to this committee include the GPD 18 Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve Cycle Course Matrix, the 18 CVPR Cycle Suitability Matrix, the Guam Police Department Volunteer Services Command Task Organization Chart, and the Volunteer Services Command Standard Operating Procedures. So for the record, those documents have been given to this committee. Good afternoon, Senator Aguon and committee members on the Guam U.S. Military Relocation, Public Safety, and Judiciary. I am Joseph I. Cruz, and I am the Chief of Police for the Guam Police Department. In this testimony, I will provide an analysis of the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve CVPR program in compliance with their Enabling Act, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, Chapter 66, the Police Officer Standards and Training, or Post-Commission, Title 17, GCA, Chapter 51, the Administrative Rules and Regulations for Peace Officer Training and Standards, Public Law 32-32, that all highlights the overview of the challenges in meeting certification and standards that ensures the proper application of departmental goals and objectives and the cost impacts critical to implementing and sustaining police training cycles. A detailed view of the status of the Civilian Volunteer Police Reservists, the standard operating procedures of the CVPR program, the status of the internal audit of the CVPR program, and the status of CVPR cycles will call to mind the Guam Police Department's objective of ensuring adequate administration of the standardized training and compliance with substantive laws intended to qualify and protect our sworn officers, and the costs associated with the implementation of increased standards of training our CVPRs. In this testimony, I will also highlight several key points that include: number one, that the function and the duty of the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve officer, consistent with that of the regular police officer personnel, requires precisely the same standard of training and certification. Number two, that the recently established administrative rules of the Post Commission that places an emphasis on the need for the department to ensure a uniform standard. And lastly, the challenges faced with the responsibility of appropriately funding all aspects of equipping and training a more robust program. The creation of the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve through Public Law 13-140 calls for general functions and duties to provide backup manpower for the suppression of crime, preservation of law and order, and to assist in civil emergencies. The Chief of Police shall be responsible for carrying out this function and from time to time review and revise the functions and duties of the CVPR program to ensure the amicable discharge of responsibilities and duties, knowing that the fact that their roles are the extension of the duties of the regular personnel. The authority vested in all CVPRs are such that they shall have the same powers and duties, rights, including coverages under the Workmen's Compensation Act, privileges and immunities as if they were paid full-time members of the Guam Police Department. For those Guam residents that show an interest in providing their services on an entirely volunteer basis, the Chief of Police is required to develop rules and regulations regarding age, health, and other requirements for recruitment purposes. Duties and responsibilities that are consistent with regular personnel suggest that certification training be conducted in precisely the same manner. Training and equipping CVPRs pursuant to their Enabling Act legislation requires that the Chief of Police to provide the members of the CVPR program training in law enforcement and operational techniques and procedures for natural and man-made emergencies. Additionally, basic supplies and equipment shall be provided to ensure a constant and operational force of the CVPR of civilian volunteer police reserves that include a continuing program for replacement. The creation of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission in 1998 and later amended in 2007 is intended to eliminate the disparity in the uneven distribution of qualifications amongst Guam's peace officers. The primary purpose of the Post Commission is the development of regulations and minimum professional standards to serve as the basis for uniform recruitment operations of Guam's law enforcement entities. Qualifications for peace officers pursuant to that law specifies that, quote, no public official, Guam agency, or any other person authorized by law to appoint peace officers on Guam shall appoint any person as a peace officer who does not meet the minimum qualifications. The post-enabling legislation designates the Guam Community College as the state agency for post, providing the administrative and professional services to the Commission. Additionally, the Executive Director of the Post Commission is authorized to consult and cooperate with the Guam Community College, the University of Guam, other institutions of higher education, or any post-certified advanced training programs for the development of specialized courses of study on Guam for peace officers in the areas of police science, police administration, the social sciences, and other related areas. The adoption of the rules and regulations for the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission in late 2014 illustrates the authority of the Commission in classifying peace officer positions and establishing the minimum standard for training and certification of each classification of peace officer. The Commission exercised this authority by establishing minimum education and training standards for general and specialized training programs for peace officers, including curricula, instructors, and facilities. Peace officer categories defined in the administrative rules and regulations identify that positions occupied by CVPRs and peace officers employed in the Guam Police Department must meet standards held by, quote, Category 1 peace officers. Job descriptions, in this category require Category 1 officers to actively engage in the prevention and detection of crime and offenses, the maintenance of custody of pretrial detainees and convicted prisoners, and the conduct of criminal investigation as this relates to general duties in the Guam Police Department. Standards for certification of Category 1 peace officers require that they possess, at a minimum, a Criminal Justice Academy certificate from an accredited college or university or a post-commission certified training program. The training program shall include skills such as report writing, criminal justice overview, first responder, officer survival and use of force, firearms and safety, first aid, cultural awareness and sensitivity, dealing with physically challenged individuals, dealing with people with disabilities, dealing with people with mental health challenges, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, active shooter, Guam Criminal Procedure, and Guam Criminal Law. Additional requirements of a Category 1 officer include a certificate of in-service training, a valid Guam firearms identification card, completion of a polygraph test, and completion of a personal background investigation to determine suitability for employment. An internal audit of the 18th CVPR cycle, the most recently trained reserve cycle, revealed certification training concerns that were inconsistent with that which is required by the aforementioned mandates. In comparison with certification training courses essential to the core function of regular personnel, the 18th CVPR cycle course list identifies courses that are either incomplete or not administered. Certification training courses intended for the 18th CVPR cycle were initially designed to be equivalent to the criminal justice certificate and inclusive of the minimum courses required by the Post-Commission rules in compliance with Public Law 32-232. The 18th CVPR cycle completed a considerable amount of training, totaling 509 of the required 735 contact hours. This training included 45 contact hours per course in essential courses such as Introduction to Criminal Justice, the Juvenile Justice Process, First Responder, and Officer Survival that includes 15 contact hours of practical application or lab, Emergency Vehicle Operators Course, Firearms, Defensive Tactics, Physical Fitness, Traffic Investigations, Police Report Writing, Social Values in the Criminal Justice System, Interpersonal Relations, Intoximeter Operator, Evidence Handling and Crime Scene Prevention, Mobile Field Report Writing, Traffic Direction, Laser and Radar Operator, Beat Patterns Familiarization, Interview and Interrogation, Incident Command System Training, Civilian Emergency Response Team Operations, Verbal Judo, and Domestic Violence Investigations. It is also important to note that the training that was afforded to the members of the 18th CVPR cycle was of a substantial amount, and that some of the training administered did exceed that which is required by law. However, the internal audit also revealed that up to 50% of the courses required by law were not administered to the cycle. To that point, that training was not administered or administered without meeting the required 45 contact hours. Those courses include first aid, dealing with physically challenged individuals, dealing with people with mental challenges, dealing with people with disabilities, active shooter, Guam criminal law, and Guam criminal procedure. Additionally, while there were courses that were administered that were above what the law required, some of the courses did not meet the minimum 45 contact hour requirement. They include dynamics of substance abuse, defensive tactics, interpersonal relationships, and social values in the criminal justice system. Those 7 identified core courses that were not administered as per Public Law 32-232 are equivalent to 350 contact hours, or 50% of the required hours needed to complete the appropriate training, and will be needed to be administered in its entirety in order to satisfy the required certifications that GPD seeks to qualify all sworn personnel. In addition to the training that the 18th CVPR cycle underwent, the internal audit also considered the minimum requirements for suitability as a Category 1 peace officer. The minimum requirements for suitability as a Category 1 peace officer requires clearances such as a police clearance, court clearance and traffic clearance, a background investigation that includes a polygraph, a Guam motor vehicle operator's license, physical and psychological fitness competence, a valid Guam firearms identification card, successfully passing a drug test, and successfully passing a reading and writing proficiency examination. The audit of the 18th CVPR program indicates the completion of suitability at only 70%, with the pending certifications for all members being the psychological examination, a background investigation that includes a polygraph test, and a reading and writing proficiency examination. The completion of the 18th CVPR cycle audit and the objectives we now face in appropriately realizing the required suitability and training needs brings to the forefront of GPD's needs to research previous training cycles. GPD will be conducting these audits moving forward and with due diligence working towards completing the suitability and training mandates required by law. I must note that the civilian volunteer police reservists contribute to the department's line operations daily and exist as an essential component addressing the needs for a larger law enforcement force. The CVPR program is currently operational and functions in the Guam Police Department in support of our missions every day. There are 31 CVPRs actively performing enforcement duties pursuant to the law, with the potential of 23 from the 18 CVPR cycle awaiting completion of the required training. A number of those reservists from the 18 CVPR cycle in the interim are performing roles such as police escorts and as law enforcement dispatchers, contributing to the overall goals and objectives of the department. GPD is committed to achieving complete certification training for members of the 18 CVPR cycle and commencing them to field operations where there is a critical need. Discussions with the Guam Community College, as recent as November 10th of this year, bring to light a year-long endeavor by GCC to complete a curriculum audit of the Unified Courts of Guam and law enforcement training and certification to determine their shortfalls in meeting post-commission mandates for over 100 of their law enforcement personnel. GCC puts forward the same concept of developing a matrix for both reserve trainees and adjunct instructors of the 23 students and the 13 instructors in the 18 CVPR cycle, and determine the required courses needed to satisfy the certification training mandates of post. The undertaking of the alignment that occurs at the Guam Community College with appropriate documentation provided by GCC is extensive and requires dedicated GPD personnel to accomplish. Collaborative work by GPD staff officers and GCC have already begun, and a timeline to complete this objective is forthcoming. The funding challenges that GPD continues to face this fiscal year imposes constraints on our ability to obtain certification training for our reserve officers and regular personnel as well. We are encouraging all GPD personnel, sworn and unsworn, to take advantage of the financial aid programs that the Guam Community College, University of Guam, and other accredited institutions are offering. Institutions offering courses required by the Post Commission for certification as a law enforcement officer on Guam offer these financial aid programs, and if applied, bring reserve candidates much closer to certification. CVPR candidates entering our programs with a certification recognized by POST alleviates the need by GPD to completely fund this objective in our current financial dilemma. There is established in the Guam Police Department a policy identified as General Order 12-01 that sets forth standard operations and responsibilities for CVPRs in the program. Authority and discretion for CVPRs is explicit in GPD policy, asserting that while on duty or when witnessing a felony, misdemeanor, or traffic violation in their presence, CVPRs have the same powers, duties, rights, privileges, and immunities as regular officers. GPD makes no distinction that will lead the public into believing that the CVPRs operate at a lower level than that of the regular officer. For this reason, it is essential that the general protective services provided by our CVPRs are in compliance with the law and that they are at a standard acceptable by our community. The post-commission discussions have brought forward the considerations of sanctioning training programs administered by the Guam Police Department. The CVPR program details provided in the audit of the 18 CVPR cycle narrow the focus of our proposals and the consideration that POST will approve the courses we administer throughout the department. Funding the CVPR program has presented many challenges that GPD is addressing, such as stipends for this fiscal year, which we have budgeted for in the amount of $70,000. GPD is current with regards to timely distribution of stipends that are reported by CVPRs, and even when facing a budget shortfall of over $4 million in this fiscal year, we are appropriately budgeting for this essential program. in order to restore the confidence of our volunteers and the line units who depend on the success of this program. It is the responsibility of the Chief of Police to provide basic supplies and equipment inclusive of the certification training required by the CVPR program. The Guam Community College provides a criminal justice certificate that satisfies the minimum requirements of the law for all law enforcement personnel. The CJ certificate program at GCC offers 11 courses with 45 contact hours and 1 officer survival lab with 15 contact hours for a total of 510 contact hours needed for the curriculum. Tuition and fees for the GCC program cost $6,742 per student. Uniform and essential equipment, including a department-issued firearm, costs $3,080 with a total cost of approximately $9,822 per CVPR trainee. It is the intent of the Guam Police Department to ensure all programs are appropriately funded and that we are in dire need of funding to ensure this important program continues to function with new volunteers augmenting our force moving forward. In conclusion, addressing the CVPR program challenges at the earliest possible time requires thorough collaboration with the Post Commission and the Guam Community College. Training gaps identified in the 18 CVPR cycle have been discussed with these critical institutions, and we are arranging for those courses to be administered when GCC completes the curriculum audit. The Guam Police Department is identifying funding in our budget to ensure the objectives can be addressed when the required courses to be administered have been recommended by both the Guam Community College and the Post Commission. GPD will incorporate all required courses in compliance with the laws established to ensure a standard of training that is realistic and intended to address public safety needs by the community in contemporary times. Just as government policy exists that requires regular personnel to receive an education from a recognized accredited school, GPD policy exists requiring the same schools to educate the civilian volunteer police reservists. Senators, at this time I would like to thank you for the opportunity to provide my testimony regarding the issues and audit conducted for the 18 CVPR cycle and the GPD CVPR program in general. At this time, I'm subject to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chief, for that very comprehensive presentation in regards to the CVPR program and the status, also in light of the 23 CVPR officers who have been pulled out from the field. You did answer some specific questions in regards to the overall training, that right now you're looking at the curriculum training requirements at 50 percentile
Yes.
of completion with the 18 cycle. These are all responses just relating to the 18 cycle CVPR,
Yes.
which affects 23 of your CVPR officers. You also responded that approximately 70% is complete with another component of that particular requirement. So that's where you stand with that particular program. You also responded to members of the committee and to the chair that you presently have 31 recognized active CVPR members, and upon the certification and the completion of addressing these pending issues with the 18 cycle participants, then you would be able to add that additional 18. And those were direct
Additional
questions.
23.
The additional 23.
Yes.
And those were questions that were directly asked by the committee. I know that you alluded to the most recent discussion with GCC officials as of the 10th of November. And I was specifically looking at what the timelines will be in regards to trying to address these pending issues as it applies to direct training as well as academics. So would it be too soon to ask you for a projected timeline so that these CVPR officers can at least look towards that particular end goal?
Mr. Chairman, I will tell you that the biggest thing that we're looking at with regards to the option of getting their certification via the Guam Community College, because as we know, there are 2 vehicles by which an individual can get certified in the territory. If we consider the vehicle of or the option of the Guam Community College, what needs to happen is their complete audit of the program that they've went through already needs to occur. Now, in our discussions with the Guam Community College, that may take some time. There were no discussions as to an exact timeline. They would be the ones to audit that particular program, to take a look at the individual and whether the individual qualifies as an adjunct instructor and meets the qualifications as an adjunct instructor. They need to look at the program of instruction, the actual syllabus that this program was based on, to make sure that the syllabus meets the intent of a college course through the Guam Community College. So those are all factors to be taken into consideration. At this point, Mr. Chairman, I do not have an exact timeline because that audit is specific to the Guam Community College. Now, we are having conversations with President Mary Okada and Mr. Pete Roberto, who is the chairman of the Criminal Justice Academy. They have assured us that we will work as aggressively as possible. But to put a definitive timeline on when we can look forward to that, unfortunately, that's something that is driven by the Guam Community College, and not to place all the burden on their shoulders, because we have a play in that as well. It would be a little premature at this point for me to try and give any kind of a projection. Again, we continue to collaborate at this point, but unfortunately, I'm not able to project a timeline at this point.
Thank you very much, Chief, for your presentation and your responses. And in light of the CVPR members and the 18th cycle, I understand that there are a number of you in the audience or maybe watching this particular presentation, and we're asking in terms of the way forward, or how the committee as well as how the department will be proceeding forward in addressing their overall certification. So I appreciate your perspective, because obviously if GCC is in the driver's seat and they need to be able to facilitate and to create these trainings within their already established curriculum for the quarter or for the semester, then certainly that it may require the GCC yield a bit more in terms of providing that direct service to GPD. So I certainly put out a request to Ms. Okada, the president of GCC, to continue to work very aggressively with the department, because certainly the responsibilities that you shared with us with regards to every single CVPR member, once they receive the full training and accreditation and certification, they are empowered with every right that every other full-time uniformed police officer has in terms of carrying out the responsibilities and their duties. So the committee certainly recognizes that and appreciate the update and the status that has been provided.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to bring to light also that the law is very specific in that there are two avenues, if you will. There are two vehicles by which an individual can get certification. The second one is one that I've provided in my testimony that we're going to take a look at as well, and that is the option considering the post commission. Now, in working with the post commission, of which I am a member of, I'm working with the other members, and I'm working with the chairman, Chief Robert Camacho from the Airport Police, to take a look at our program as well. Because not only do we have the option of going with the Guam Community College, but the law is very specific in that if we can present a case to the post commission and get them to recognize the program that's already in place with the Guam Police Department, we can take a look at that avenue, if you will. We can take a look at that option as well. And not to put timelines on either options, but I would think that it would be worth our while, and it would be our due diligence to consider both options as well. So I want to make it clear to everybody, especially this committee, that we are looking at both options, and that we are meeting with both entities, the Post Commission and the Guam Community College, to look at which option would be the best option. I don't want to say the most expeditious option, because that may imply that again, we're going to try and not meet the standard. Now, we obviously don't want to do that. We train to the standard, and we don't train to time. And I know that Senator Ada is very aware of that particular saying, but again, we train to the standard. So if the standard tells us that it's this particular timeline, regardless of the option, we're going to go with the best course of action for the Guam Police Department that's in the best interest of every reservist in the police department.
And certainly that's what they requested a response on. And I think that the outlying or the overlying issue here is ensuring that the public feels comfortable that these men and women who continue to serve our community in uniform are trained to the best that the department can provide in terms of being able to provide public safety services. So let me open up the line of questions to any of my colleagues. Mr. Vice Speaker, and then Senator Underwood.
Thank you very much, Chief. You mentioned that the 18th cycle was the cycle that an audit was conducted?
Yes,
for
Vice
CVPR.
Speaker.
Are there any other cycles, the 17th, the 16th, that you're considering auditing?
Absolutely, Vice Speaker. The results of this audit has led us, in being comprehensive, we are taking a look at the entire program, and that we are considering the possibility, or we're considering that there is a need to look at all the cycles before that, just to make sure that we are doing our part. We're doing our due diligence to make sure that all our police reserves are meeting that same standard. So at this point in time, we are conducting an audit to take a look at the 17 cycles and the cycles before that as well, to ensure that they are also in accordance with the law.
In your opening paragraphs, you mentioned that the training for the CVPRs can and should be equal to your regular police force, right?
Yes, sir.
Are you going to be reviewing the cycles of your regular police officers also to determine whether or not they meet the post standards?
We already have, Vice Speaker, and we are confident that the training cycles conducted by our full-time force is already in compliance with that standard.
Okay. How long has GPD been doing its own training as opposed to taking the BELEA and the certified graduates from GCC for their force?
We have always, for our full-time force, we have always gone through the Guam Community College to ensure that our officers are trained to a certain standard. To answer when we started doing training on our own, it appears at this point, and I cannot say definitively because we're still taking a look at our audit, but at some point in the last several years, the reserve program was trained separate and apart from that training which was grounded or codified in the training that's conducted up at GCC.
There was a time when I had oversight over GPD.
Yes, sir.
And I thought I recall having discussions with President Okada and the then chief, asking why it was necessary for GPD to do its own training as opposed to sending out an announcement that they have 30 slots open for people who graduated, got their AA in CJ or got their certification up at GCC. And we had at least, I can remember at least 3 different discussions with the chief about trying to get the GPD to accept and at least shorten their training for their regular force, because at least my recollection was that the courses at GCC are all the different areas, but there may be specifics to GPD that are different from customs, that are different from fire, that are different from probation.
Yes, sir.
And so there would be some need for additional hours of training to get you into get the new recruit into the culture of GPD. And I can remember several discussions asking, why would you spend very meager resources of the department on your own training cycle when you could do a shorter training cycle by taking the GCC graduates, and rather than putting them through 6 months of training, put them through a 2-month orientation to GPD 2015 and how you want them to do certain reports. and we could never get a good answer. There were some answers, but I won't repeat them publicly, about why that was done. But is there going to be a move to try to take advantage of literally hundreds of individuals currently in the community who have a GCC certification, or certificate, and some of them actually having an AA and CJ, or their certification in Balea, that are valets at some of the hotels?
Yes, sir.
They're security guards for some of the big companies.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, is there going to be an effort to try to take the training that these people have already and bring them into the department?
Vice Speaker Colonel Sayama would like to address that particular issue.
Sir, my recollection of history in regards to training, the department has never taken a stance that we've taken the whole piece of training and said we're going to do it on our own for regular police officers. That concept was adopted for the reserve program. We do take into consideration those that come to us from DOA or through the merit process, those that have those certificates in their possession, and then modify the training in accordance to that. So those things have occurred, but to say we're just going to go out there and get those that have certificates just doesn't happen that way, because we have to go through the merit process, and the names that come over from DOA are the names we get. So we have a mixture of those that have those trainings, and you have the mixture of those that just come out of high school. So it's never been a true, science that we get only those with certificates.
What's the current cycle number for the current for regular police officers that you're going right now?
Right now, sir, we are training 20 police officer trainees. They're going through training up at the Guam Community College right now. There's a minimum
what's the cycle number? Not the number of people in it, but
it's the 7th POT cycle.
7th POT. If we were to go back and audit the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 5th and 6th, would we find that all three of those cycles were done by and through GCC, or would we find that those cycles were trained by and through a training regimen that was put together by GPD?
In understanding
Your
question, we've had those where we've actually had to modify training, like you mentioned earlier, and I don't think the numbers are high. We've had to go back because of the certification process or the certificate that's acknowledged or recognized by DOA, that even though we get somebody who has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and comes into our area and he's hired, he goes through our fast, not to use that word, but accelerated program to get them to the the skills that they need to be. We've had to actually bring them back from the streets because of the DOA requirement saying they don't possess a GCC certificate or a post-certified or recognized certificate. So we've had those issues. We've done our best to try to vet those people through, but it has cost us more on the long run, because then we've had to bring some of those people back, send them back to GCC, get their required courses, get their certificate, and then send them out. Some as long as 2 years later.
And so I'm to take from today's testimony that you're both saying that the 6th, 5th, and 4th cycles of the regular police department were all graduates of or went through the GCC program, and not a GPD specific.
Yes, sir. It's for the most part, GPD has not taken a full stance on the active training training of our active officers. We've always put into place the skills that we teach in addition to GCC requirements. And then the police reserve programs were the active role of instructing them from cradle or from crawling to running. That's actually that's where we have taken the full.
When and why did
that.
GPD start doing its own training of the civilian force?
Not sure when that started, so I was beyond my pay grade when that first started. So, unless you have an answer for that, sir, on this.
I can only answer from my side.
Okay, so it may have occurred 2 chiefs before that, before the last one, but I'm not too sure without getting some history from the reserve program.
Okay, no, because I'm just trying, because I can recall, I was teasing President Okada. I can even remember the color of her shoes the time that she and I, at each time that she and I and the chief sat down and tried to get him to send them, or to have GCC do the training. And because we were asking why it was necessary for GPD to expend their very,
I think above all,
their
sir,
resources
the
on that
main
kind of-
reason was what you just said, resources. I think that may have been the deciding factor on why GPD went that route. I don't know I was again privy to those conversations at that point, but funding has always, or GPD has always lacked funding when it comes to trying to train our reservists, and so we do our best by we have certified adjunct instructors from GCC, from our force, who teach there normally, and then we've taken some of those and actually applied their teaching skills towards the reserve program.
Because in the testimony you talk about it might cost $9,000 worth of tuition up at GCC. And I can explicitly recall the discussions that I had with the former chief and President Okada, where she was saying, why would you want to spend $9,000 when we have a bunch of these graduates who, utilizing the suggestion you're now coming up with, Chief,
Yes.
of applying for and receiving grants and scholarships and tuition, that there were all of these Balea and certified graduates that were able to get their degrees with their scholarships, and they were not being considered. We were lost. I mean,
well, we do have
because until this term, I had GPD, and so I can recall those discussions very clearly.
I think in moving forward, sir, and discussing with the chief, with the Guam Community College, we're looking at that. And in this particular cycle, the 18th cycle, they actually had 6 people who did possess those certificates as well. So they were considered into the gamut. But again, we have to move forward. I think with those 6, I believe, if everything checks out, those are some of the people that may be able to hit the road a little bit sooner than the rest of the cycle. But those are all the issues that we've looked at and trying to get our program back on track.
Okay, good. Chief, you mentioned that you had funding challenges in this upcoming budget, and I'm just wondering, was GPD exempted from the 15% reserve, or were you also instructed that there would be a 15% reserve on the Guam Police Department?
We are subject to the 15% reserve. We are subject to that.
How much, and I'm glad to see in your testimony that you stated that you are current with the payment to the CVPR guys, because I know that many of you have had to suffer me constantly asking that question. But so I'm really happy to hear that. But the other thing that I've been concerned about was in the allocation that you've made for this current fiscal year. You had to turn that in last month, right?
The allocation for...
You had a lump sum payment, and
Yes.
before the 20th of October, I think, you were all instructed to submit back to BBMR how you planned on using...
Yes.
How much did you set aside for training in your allocation? Because this legislature gave you a lump sum budget. How much did you set aside for that?
For the training piece, I don't have those documents in front of me right now, but that is something that we're taking a look at. We have considered setting aside monies for training. I apologize, Vice Speaker, I don't have my budget before me or even the budget outlay before me. I have spoken with my ASO and my committee that takes a very close look at the budget. We have allocated monies for that, Vice Speaker, but again, I don't have those documents in front of me, and I can't speak specifically to the dollar amount that we've set aside for training.
Okay, if you would, Mr. Chairman, if that could be provided to you. The other thing that I was concerned about in trying to meet your allocation, we've had discussions privately in my office about the cost of executive security. And what percentage of the GPD budget is devoted to executive security?
What portions of the budget that is specifically budgeted for executive security, we consider in the budget benefits and salaries for the executive security like we do all others. So there is no specific allocation for the executive security section with regards to the budget. We don't take a look at executive security separately and allocate monies specifically to them. We pay them out, their benefits and salaries like we do all other police officers in the department, regardless of where they're assigned to.
Yeah, I understand it because I received your FOIA response, and I was a little concerned trying to figure out individuals that were assigned to executive security. Some of them were being paid for certain pay periods out of the chief's office because prior to your coming on, they were an adjunct within the chief's purview.
Yes.
And then they were separated, and sometimes they were separated and given complete designation. The same officer,
Yes.
run his name down with his 2 or 3 different names that he has with the same last name but different first name and initials. And sometimes he's paid out of chief, sometimes he's paid out of executive security. And I was trying to figure out how or why that would have happened, and whether or not in budgeting for your department you determined that 10% would be allocated to executive security and this much to south, this much to north,
Yes.
whatever. I don't know. I have to admit I did not look at your allocation.
What I
was hoping you weren't going to talk about funding needs at this one. I thought it was just going to be CVPR, but since you brought it up in your testimony, I think I need to ask those questions.
To answer that question, Vice Speaker, what I've done is I formulated our Special Operations Division within the Guam Police Department. So historically, where you would see units in the Guam Police Department falling in under the Office of the Chief of Police, I've decided to move those entities to put them in their own division under Operations Bureau. So where you may have saw one police officer who's getting paid out of the budget for the Office of the Chief, and now that same police officer is falling in under Special Operations Division, which is under Operations Bureau, it's because I formulated or reformulated the Special Operations Division, which now the Executive Security Section, the Special Enforcement and Amphibious Section, our Detention Section, and the Strike Force, thank you. The Criminal Justice Strike Force, those 4 entities fall under Special Operations Division, which is a function of operations and no longer under the Office of the Chief of Police.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just, I'll have to speak to President Okada because my recollection is different, and so we'll have to look at those. But I'm glad that you're looking at previous cycles.
Yes.
But maybe if it's possible, if the chairman would allow to see the audit report for the regular cycles that you conducted. You said you conducted an audit of the training for previous regular cycles, right?
We did not audit them because we are confident that the training that they're going through has always been vetted through the Guam Community College because they're going through the apprenticeship program. So there was never a need to audit it because what was happening is that the training of our full-time police officers has always been a function of our training and staff development section. What had happened in the past, to no discredit of any of my predecessors, the training of the CVPRs was taken out of training and staff and held in the Civilian Volunteer Police Reserve program. Now, I realize, Vice Speaker, that you had conversations with President Okada regarding that and why it was done that way. But with regards to what you were specifically talking about, for the full-time officers, it's never been housed anywhere else. The training of our full-time officers has always been a function of training and staff, and we've always worked very closely with GCC. Now, I'd like to bring to a point that when we work with GCC, while they have a CJ certificate, because of the courses given specifically under the curriculum outlined for a CJ certificate, we do not take, our full-time officers don't take some of those courses. Take, for example, math and English. Every officer sitting at this table right now, when we went through the police academy, never went through math and English. We went through math and English on our own to get higher degrees. So what we're doing for our peace officers right now is we're putting them through what we call the Apprenticeship Program. So the cost for a police reserve to the tune of almost or over $9,000 to train our full-time force, they're trained by the Apprenticeship Program, and Department of Labor picks up that bill.
And how long has this been going on?
This has been going on back to, I believe, the fourth cycle. So that's how we have figured out, because there's no money in the budget to be able to pay for those. We've worked it out with Department of Labor because of grant funding to be able to have them pay for the cost to GCC to pay for to train these people. Now, in doing that, because we created that now we are paying for it through GCC. We told GCC, here's what we want in this training. And in doing that, we went to the Post Commission and we spoke to the Post Commission and we told the Post Commission, this is what we want in the training, and the Post Commission blessed off on it. So that's the out-of-the-box thinking, if you will, that the Guam Police Department has done to be able to train our full-time officers and not have to break the bank in paying this to the Guam Community College, as we train currently 20 police officers or police officer trainees. So while we're doing that with a full-time force, I cannot do that with the CVPRs because they're not full-time employees. And the Department of Labor is very specific that they can only apply that kind of funding to full-time employees. So now the reason why I bring up the budget, although we didn't want it to be a budget issue, is because the fact is this comes out of high in the Guam Police Department. This is something that we are budgeted for. It's not something we're programmed for. So we have to figure out yet another innovative way to be able to train our officers, hence the possibility of why reserve training went in the direction it did. Regardless, I don't want to speak to that point, Vice Speaker, but what I will tell you is, regardless of what it is, I've made the conscious decision that we're going to realign all training, whether you're a part-time employee in the reserve program or a full-time employee in the department. It goes through training and staff, and we'll figure it out along the way.
I'm very happy to hear that, because as you put in the very beginning, they should have the same training because they have the same powers. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just go back through my old notes to try to determine what my recollections were of those previous discussions.
Thank you, Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, and thank you very much, Chief. Before I recognize Senator Underwood, Chief, we do have two matrices that you provided members of the committee. If I can just ask you to explain each sheet. One is a course matrix and the other one is a suitability matrix.
Yes.
I know that you outlined some of the provisions in your presentation, but please, just for the understanding of members of the committee, if you can just bring us to light in terms of how this impacts the 18th cycle CVPR members, and then we'll go ahead and continue with questions.
Okay, if we take a look at the course matrix, it's an Excel spreadsheet. Along the left-hand column from 1 through 23, those are all the members, all the police reservists that attended the 18th CVPR cycle. Across the very top, are all the courses that they took. And it starts with the Introduction to Criminal Justice, and it works its way all the way across horizontally. There's a break there where it says in-service training, which is not part of the 14 that were outlined in the public law. Those were separate trainings that were conducted that we thought, that the Guam Police Department thought would be training that we want to train our CVPRs on. So where you see up to in-service training, those are the required trainings by law. Now for each reservist that went through the training, if there is an X in that box, which aligns to the course they took across the top, it shows that they completed the course. If there is a 0 or a circle, it shows that they did not take the course. So as you take a look at it across, you can see, take for example, CJ 200 criminal law, all the way down up to the highlighted portion, and those have gone through the CJ Academy and gotten a certificate. None of them took criminal law. None of them took criminal procedure. None of them took defensive tactics. Now, we highlighted these, or we brought those across on the top because those are specific to the statute, Public Law 32-232. Again, so what's listed, continuing on with the spreadsheet after in-service training, again shows the courses that were offered, and if they completed it, they met the 45 hour per course threshold, then they received credit for that. So what's listed as an X, they've completed, or it meets the standard, and if it's an O, then they didn't complete it, or it does not meet the standard.
So, Chief, you just alluded to the course matrix,
Yes.
of which you've identified that the CVPR members in the 18th cycle have met 50% of that requirement,
That's correct.
based on your presentation. Now, if we can go to the suitability matrix, please.
Yes. When you take a look at the suitability matrix, we took a look based on the law of all what the law indicates that they must take. So again, if you take a look at the matrix from 1 to 23, that lists everybody in the cycle. Across the top, where you see BI, that's a background investigation, drug testing, whether they've taken a urinalysis test with Department of Administration or wherever, whether they've gone through a polygraph, a psychological evaluation, a physical assessment, whether they've done a police clearance, a Superior Court clearance, a traffic clearance. We went ahead and added in a rev and tax clearance, although it's not indicated in the statute, and then any remaining remarks. So as you take a look at it, if there's an X, they've met that requirement per Public Law 32-232. If there's a circle, they didn't meet that requirement.
And based on your presentation, 70% or your
They've only
CVPR
met the
members have
threshold of being in compliance up to a 70%
70%.
percentile for the entire cycle.
Okay.
Now, if you take a look at it, the big ones there, where you see zeros all the way down, is the background investigation and the polygraph. And the psych eval. Those are the three big ticket items with regards to eligibility that these reservists have not gone through.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief.
You're
Senator Underwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Chief, for your comprehensive testimony. You know, whenever we talk about certification and training and standards, and then we see that, you know, the individuals have not met the standards to be, to be deemed capable of handling their responsibilities. At the bottom line for the community is this, is whether there had been any evidence given the deficiency in the certification requirements and meeting the requirements and the training here. Has there been any kind of evidence that these individuals had posed not so much a danger, but inadequate performance while they were while they were reserves?
Senator, I will tell you that when they went through their training, they did a very good job in their training based on the amount of training they were given. But I like to focus on just the curriculum piece on two particular classes. We call them we've dubbed those classes war stoppers. And those are criminal law and criminal procedure. If you take a look at criminal law, they cover concepts that include things like probable cause, reasonable suspicion, beyond reasonable doubt, preponderance of the evidence, stop and frisk, simple concepts like that are very fundamental. They're very fundamental, but they tie back to the very things that are grounded in the Constitution of the United States. If you don't understand those concepts as a law enforcement officer and you don't know how to apply it, and you go out onto the road, you could hypothetically be violating a person's rights because you don't understand probable cause. You don't understand protection against illegal search and seizure and the protection against self-incrimination. So if they've never been given the class, although they've never acted or done anything to say that they were incompetent, by the fact that they never underwent those classes, in my opinion, we are doing a disservice to the community and a disservice to those reserve officers. So while they are great officers, every single one of them, I'm sure they're great people, the fact that they were never even made aware of what some of those concepts are that are critical. Cases could be won or lost in the misapplication of some of these concepts. I'm just saying that although they've not done anything, I don't want to put them in a position where they could do something and then we have a bigger problem on our hands.
I understand. So now, our concern, of course, as noted by, I believe it was Vice Speaker who had asked the question, you had just focused on the 18th cycle, but there were other groups of volunteers that have gone through the similar type of training, correct?
That's correct.
That right now you're demonstrating to us is insufficient.
That is correct.
Okay, so if that's the case, wouldn't we then raise concerns about are those volunteers at work right now? I mean, are they in place?
They are. And at this point, we're taking a look at their training files as well. We're taking a look at their training records. So specifically, and you could maybe apply a cookie cutter application to their training. I will tell you that before I do anything in the Guam Police Department, that would be knee-jerkish, if you will. I would rather be slow and deliberate, where slow is smooth and smooth is fast, in order to be able to fully understand the situation at hand. I think it would be a better decision, and it would be our due diligence, that because for this 18 CVPR cycle, this was brought to hand, that we take a look and analyze that. And that based on that, if there's anything that would warrant us to believe that the cycles before that their training was in question, we will do our part to take a look at that, and if it warrants pulling them off the road, then we'll do that at that point. But again, I didn't want to be, for lack of a better term, I didn't want to simply react or overreact to a particular situation. I think it was a better decision, and it was a decision that was made amongst the entire leadership in the Guam Police Department, that we fully understand what we're up against, and we be deliberate about the decisions that we're going to make.
I have an appreciation for that, for being deliberate and so on. But actually what you've done is you've opened up, I would say, a can of worms. Because if our stance here is to ensure that they have the fundamental skills and knowledge to be able to go out there, and yet we have a group that we have found to not have been trained adequately, but we also know that there are other groups that preceded them that are already in place, then we have to be able to assure our community that these volunteers are they're under some type of supervision, they're in partnership with a fully trained police officer, or that they would not even, in the course of an investigation, would not jeopardize the handling of evidence and so on. So that's where I am coming from. that, to me, for you to show as an educator, and you show that they only met the 77% of what they're required, and we place the safety of our community in their hands, then we need to then not just be deliberate about this, but I think we need to examine and examine this, the rest of the group.
Oh,
very,
Senator, make no
very
mistake,
soon.
that's exactly what we're doing. That is exactly what we're doing. But rather than to stop the entire machine that's already in place, we're taking a look at it, and we are doing our part. We are taking a look at it. And you referenced opening up a can of worms. I would rather open up a can of worms to reveal that we have a situation than to keep that can of worms closed. And we have a
Absolutely.
potential issue on our hands that's going to jeopardize the community or anybody in the Guam Police Department. So in doing that, Senator, I will tell you that yes, we are taking a look at that, and we are considering that there may be potential shortfalls in the 17th, the 16th, and however many cycles we want to go back. But we need to do our part, just like we're doing our part now, to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing because of the fact that they were already put out there on the road. We want to make sure that this is the right thing that
Right.
we're doing.
And that was why, Chief, I asked you in my opening question whether there was any evidence at all that these individuals are not performing to par, as you would have expected.
Yes.
In spite of the fact that they did not take all the courses and training that is required of them.
Yes.
That's basically why I asked that. Because
Yes.
sometimes, in education, we also go through certification. And there are times when our substitute or limited term teachers perform a lot better than our fully certified teachers.
Yes.
So that was why I had asked you the question about whether there's any kind of concern that you might have through your supervisors or those who supervise them about their performance.
Yes,
Okay.
I understand that, Senator,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. Believe me when I say, Senator, we're taking a very close look at it, and I assure you and the people of Guam that we are taking a look at that, and at the moment that we discover that there's an issue and that we need to go back and pull somebody back off the road so we don't present a particular situation, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Underwood. Senator Toniana?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, you were talking about your suitability matrix here,
Yes.
and the three sections, the background, the polygraph, and the psych eval. Have these been completed already, or not completed? yet?
We are working on it right now.
Yeah.
So although we've identified at the time that we conducted this audit that they weren't, we are taking the measures, we are taking the steps to get them to look into the background investigations, the polygraph, and psych evals.
So these are not conducted prior to the individuals going through the course?
They're supposed to, Senator. Based on Guam law, Public Law 32-232, they're supposed to.
So then, where was the, I would say, break in communication, or?
Senator, I cannot account, the way I see it, Senator, is myself, as the Chief of Police, I'm responsible for everything that the Guam Police Department does or fails to do. I cannot account for what happened before I became the Chief of Police. I cannot tell you definitively why these 18 or these 23 individuals in the CVPR program were allowed to come into the program without going through the vetting process, as we put it. I cannot tell you why it was done by the former chief or the former chiefs, if you will. All I can tell you is that I've identified it, I figured out that there's a problem, and that way forward, this is the way we need to fix this.
Okay, so you're taking corrective action on these three for the 18th cycle. Who will be conducting the background investigation and the polygraph and the psych eval?
Those
Is that
are done
in-house, or?
It's done in-house except for the psych eval. Now, I will share with you that the psych eval is going to be another issue of contention when it comes to fiscal. And I say this because a psych eval, is done at the cost of $500 per psychological evaluation. And this committee knows that because that's how much it took to get me to go through that evaluation. So I know that very well. But we're looking at the different ways. There is the Department of Corrections, who has a certified clinical psychologist. There is the the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Clinic that also has clinical psychologists that can help us out. Now I'm talking and I'm collaborating with those directors as well to try and figure out how we can get these psych evals and not have to bear the brunt of $500 per employee at 23 employees, because that's just money we don't have.
Right.
But in-house, the background investigation and the polygraph, those are all done within the Guam Police Department at no cost.
And those
to the
are
department.
certified
We
individuals that,
all police officers can conduct background investigations. We do them now for all our employees full-time. So we do our own background investigations. And the polygraph, we have 2 certified polygraph examiners.
oh, that's great. Okay, so then so moving forward then, everyone that either goes through the CVPR or the regular police officer training is going to have a background investigation, psych eval, and
That is correct.
and
That is
polygraph
correct.
prior to their admittance into the program.
Absolutely. The same standard as with our full-time employees. There's no different. Remember, the public law
Right.
leveled the playing field. So now I've already briefed the staff. The staff is on board with this concept, this program. It's codified in the law, and this is the way we're going to move forward.
And how about the weapons training? The same thing?
The weapons training is done in-house. Those are all conducted by certified firearms instructors within the Guam Police Department.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate
welcome,
it. Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Tonieta. Just a follow-on question before I call the Vice Chair, Senator Tom Addott, for his question. Chief, just taking a look at your matrix, with regards to the suitability, these are all inclusive in the rules and regulations and the public law?
That is correct,
32-32?
except for the rev and tax clearance. That is, we just decided to add that in there, but that requirement is not codified in Public Law 32-1232.
Okay, then going to your course matrix, everything prior to, like you mentioned, the in-service training are requirements by law. Everything subsequent to that, to the right, are internal requirements but within the Guam Police Department, which is directly work-related in terms of the services that you provide and the responsibilities that you carry out. Now, if a CVPR officer does not meet any of these requirements, when would you pull them off the shift? Or will you just do go ahead, I'll allow you to respond.
If we've identified that somebody has gone through training, and in the course of their training, remember, what the law is specific, that you either take the training courses and get it sanctioned by the Post Commission, or you get a certificate. So it's one or the other. And if they've gone through the program and it's sanctioned by the Post Commission, then in its entirety, that meets the threshold mandated by law, and they're allowed to serve as a peace officer in the territory. So whether it's through that program or another, we take that's how we move forward. So hypothetically, if we get somebody from any state or territory, any other jurisdiction, and they come to Guam, and they've gone through an academy at a previous jurisdiction, and it's Post accredited, and it's certified by Post. If they express a desire or interest to come into the police department, we go before the Post Commission. The Post Commission says yes, the training that they went through in any other jurisdiction is certified. It's recognized. They're good to go. They come into the program. So then there would be no need for me to go in there and look at these specific courses. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so it's just like in education, getting the degrees. We don't stop and take a look at all the different courses to get a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I can go from here to there to anywhere with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, as long as it's from an accredited university. It's accepted anywhere you go. The same concept will apply based on what the law is telling us. So I won't be looking at Colonel Sayama's training records, because he comes with a certificate already. So there was no need for me to look and see whether he's done firearms training. because he's got his certificate already. I'm not going to question the certificate of the sanctioning body. But if somebody walks in the door or somebody says, I'm not trained and I need to be trained, I need to make sure then that they meet the standards as indicated by the law.
So, Chief, the follow-on then would be, under your watch, this is the matrix that would be applied.
That's correct.
Continuously. Under your watch, the people of Guam, in subsequent trainings for CVPR officers, as well as full-time, but the full-time goes through the police cycle at Guam Community College, so they're not directly an issue here. So under your watch, these things, we can assure the people of Guam that every single CVPR officer that is certified, that is put out there in the field, meets all these training requirements, inclusive of the suitability, so that they can be assured that they'll be providing the best public safety services
Undoubtedly,
possible.
undoubtedly, Mr. Chairman, that from this point forward, from the moment forward, from when under my watch, as you put it, we can assure the people of Guam that our police officers will be trained to the standard.
Would it be possible for you to formulate this within your general orders, so that even subsequent to your departure, if in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years you decide to leave the department,
Yeah.
then at least this would still be in place in
Yes.
terms of meeting and check marking these boxes, so that we don't have to come back to future legislatures and question whether in fact all these requirements by law are being met. So
I will
just a
tell you,
suggestion on your part.
Mr. Chairman, that to answer your question, yes, and we are taking a look at that. We have a General Orders Committee that's taking a look at that. But even taking it a step further, while we are going to make sure that our general orders are caught up in that, all this is grounded in Guam law, which supersedes any general order. So nothing trumps Guam law. So regardless, all of this will be codified. And I understand what you're saying. All these subsequent trainings,
The subsequent
they will
trainings,
be
yes.
all part of the program as well.
Yeah.
But make no mistake, the minimum acceptable standard is that which is codified in the law. That definitely will be in the. I will assure this committee and the people of Guam that it will be that general order be updated to include everything that's listed here. But at no time, we will always exceed the standard, but never fail to meet the standard.
Thank you, Chief. Senator Thomas?
Chief, going back to the matrix, you pointed out, for example, in the course matrix, there was a couple of, as you put it, war stoppers that it seems a lot of the folks on the 18th cycle did not take, and that was the criminal law and criminal procedure.
Yes, sir.
With the exception of, there's about 5 folks
There's 6 altogether.
that did take the course through another
Yes, sir.
venue.
Yes, sir.
And then, of course, under the suitability, some of those same individuals who took those course, of course, did not undergo for example, the psych eval and the polygraph. Now, as I understand it, the personnel in the 18th cycle, you've pulled them off the street, right?
I've never allowed them to go onto the street.
Okay, so I can understand. Well, I guess what I'm kind of struggling with is in the course matrix. Granted, as you put it, those 2 courses are war stoppers, but you wouldn't necessarily. How'd you put it? Maybe those individuals you wouldn't send out on their own, but you would. But if they were to go out, those individuals will necessarily have to be under the wings of a fully certified officer. So it's kind of like I'm using the maintenance ratings. He's in an amber condition. He's limited duty, so he has to be under the wings of a fully certified officer. And so, if that kind of philosophy was going to be used, and I can see putting this guy back out on the street. Okay. But I do have concern about if these individuals. So now the individual, going back to those 6 then who did take those 2 courses, they did not undergo the psych eval and the polygraph.
Yes, sir.
Would you? I'm concerned about that we would put somebody out on the street who may have completed all the courses, but for some reason did not undergo the polygraph or psych eval, I mean, would you have put somebody out who did not undergo at least those two?
I would not.
You would not?
I would not.
Okay, fine. So at least we agree with that. And I guess as I looked at that and says, my gosh, we're gonna put individuals out there who have not undergone the psych eval, and we don't know if they're ticking bombs or what. So that for me would be the war stopper.
Yes, sir.
The fact that they did not take a certain course, I think that can be mitigated somewhat by
Yes, sir.
putting him under the wings of a more seasoned officer.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, I would be very concerned about the suitability factors here, in particular the psych eval and the polygraph. So
Yes, sir.
okay, well that gives me a little bit of better comfort then.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Vice Speaker Cruz?
I really appreciate the fact that you're reviewing the CVPRs, because if memory serves me right, in this last year, one of the giant riots, I think it was Ferguson, was precipitated by a volunteer police officer. And in that case was an honorary one. Do you have such a thing in the CVPR here of honorary police reservists? And if so, do they have the requisite training that you're demanding of everybody else?
Vice Speaker, we do not have any honorary police reservists. We do have honorary deputy chiefs of police, but they don't serve in any kind of law enforcement function. No such entity, no such individual in the Guam Police Department exists as an honorary civilian volunteer police reservist.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. That concluding all the questions from the members of the committee. Chief, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation and responding to the committee's inquiry with regards to the 18th cycle and its impact on the CVPR program. A couple of takeaways or requests. Chief, please, if we can get information with regards to your budget allocation for training, which was information requested by Vice Speaker Cruz. And then also, where do we go from here in terms of the timeline you will need to be able to provide regular feedback to members of the committee? Would 30 days be sufficient in terms of getting back to the committee every 30 days with regards to the timeline and the program that you're going to have implemented with GCC, projected timelines possibly, and then also a status report on your additional audits of prior CVPR cycles?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Chairman.
So we'll be expecting by December 12th a report on any activity between now and then in terms of the status of the CVPR program audits for prior cycles, inclusive of cycle 18, and then also your budget allocation for training.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Chief, and officers. Thank you very much for your service to our island community. Appreciate all the work you do. The committee will now suspend discussion on this particular oversight, and we'll continue our discussion with a roundtable within 30 minutes, scheduled for 1600. In that particular case, it's 4 p.m. this afternoon, and it's involving all law enforcement entities on island. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.